When it comes to love and compassion, most of us have our limits. There is some boundary beyond which our compassion does not go. We withhold it from certain people for any number of reasons, which perhaps all seem quite reasonable. Some people, it would seem, are not deserving of our love and compassion. Some people, we may believe, are not deserving of anyone's love and compassion. You see, we all have a circle of love, or if you prefer, you can think of it as a bubble. And there are certain people who we allow into that circle, and people who we exclude from it, either intentionally, or we just don't give them any consideration at all. For most of us, the circle is very small, and it primarily consists of those whose company we enjoy, those who we appreciate, those who have been kind to us, those who have provided for us in some way, and so on. Or it may be comprised of our close friends and family. It may be that once in a while we'll meet someone who we allow into that space for a time, but then when they have disappointed us, we cast them out. But all of this is based upon a very limited understanding of love. We think of love as something which is limited. We only have so much of it to offer, and so there are certain conditions which must be met. Or we think of love as a kind of commodity, something to be bargained for. And so a person must make some effort to earn it. It's not freely given, but rather we exchange our love for something in return. In this way, it becomes like a business transaction. If you give me kindness, if you give me affection, if you give me this thing or that thing, then I will give you love. Otherwise, take your business elsewhere. Or if we have made some arrangement and you don't honor that, for example, I give you love in exchange for your company or your affection or whatever it happens to be, and at some later point you stop providing these things, then the contract becomes void, and I take that love back from you. So we have all these conditions, all these very limited ideas about love. But love, in its essence, is really something expansive, limitless, pervasive. And when we withhold our love by confining it to very restrictive conditions, our ability to experience love in all its fullness also becomes restricted. And in those areas where there is an absence of love, where our love does not reach, we feel something else entirely. We may feel hatred toward those outside of our circle, or if not hatred, perhaps apathy, indifference, or a sense of disconnect. It may simply be that we don't know them, they're strangers to us, or they have simply not yet done anything to earn a place within our circle. And what I would like to talk about here today is whether or not we might expand that circle, whether or not we might expand our heart of compassion. When we talk about the heart means center. And when we're talking about our circle of love and compassion, what is at the center is you. So this all begins with oneself. That we begin all of this by having compassion for ourselves. And what that means is not that we love ourselves because of all of our wonderful and beautiful qualities. Certainly we should honor all of that. But that we also take into account all of our perceived flaws and imperfections, all of our mistakes and failings, all of our so-called negative qualities. That we take all of these things into account and we meet them with forgiveness, with acceptance, that we love ourselves in spite of those things that we don't particularly like about ourselves, that we accept ourselves in spite of all those things that we would otherwise consider unacceptable, that we forgive ourselves, which simply means that we let go of any resentment that we may have toward ourselves, that we recognize our humanness with all of its imperfection, and we embrace ourselves with gentleness, with loving kindness and compassion. It all begins in oneself, so that as we are able to have compassion for ourselves, it becomes only natural that this compassion extends outward toward others. The more we understand ourselves, the more we understand others. The more we are able to forgive ourselves, the more we are able to forgive others, and so on. To the capacity with which we love ourselves, it is to that same capacity that we are able to love others. And so from there we expand our heart to include those close to us, our friends and family, even those family members who we may not always get along with, or who behave in ways that tend to cause us some irritation, that we come to love them even in spite of all that. And this doesn't mean that we excuse people's inconsiderate behavior. It doesn't mean that we condone it or put up with it. We can make it known to them. We can express how we feel about it. We can set boundaries in regard to their behavior. But the boundaries of love and compassion we extend. And from there we can begin to extend that boundary outward a little farther to include our neighbors, our co-workers, as well as anyone else we may come into contact with on a daily basis, to those stocking the shelves at the grocery store, the cashier, the person who bags our groceries. And we keep expanding our circle larger and larger to include more and more people, to include all the people in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, and so on. All the people you haven't even met and may not ever meet. But simply knowing that everyone is struggling in some way, everyone is suffering in some way. No one is without challenges in this life, even those who appear to have it easy. In some ways things may be easy, but in other ways which we may not see, they may have many difficulties. We often hear, for example, how those who may be rich and famous struggle with all kinds of psychological and emotional difficulties. And you may even imagine what it might be like to be famous. You can't even go out someplace without people approaching you, wanting something, people crowding all around you, taking photographs and so on. They never seem to leave you alone. You have no space or privacy for yourself. Or if you're rich, you may find yourself surrounded by so many people who just want to get some of those riches. And you may often wonder who your real friends are, or whether you even have any real friends. Would all these people still treat you the same if you didn't have all that money? Is it you that they like, or is it just the money? And so you may find yourself quite lonely, even surrounded by all these people. And on top of this, all your money and fame doesn't really buy you happiness. You can be rich and still be very miserable. So we think of those who seem to have it all and recognize that probably even for them there is something which seems to be missing, or they have their own kind of problems that come specifically with being rich or famous. And we may not relate to those problems, but perhaps we can still understand them to some degree. And in understanding them, we can extend our heart of compassion to include all those people as well. So onward and outward, we keep expanding our heart to include more and more of the world. And we might think of all the people in the world who are struggling in poverty, with disease, wherever there is war or injustice, wherever there is natural disaster or environmental destruction. And we expand our compassion to include all the other creatures who may be suffering as a result of these things, including suffering at the hands of human beings. Onward and outward, expanding the heart of compassion to embrace all living beings, allowing that expansion to envelop the entire planet. But perhaps there are still those who we have not included in this expansion. Perhaps there are those who we have intentionally excluded. Perhaps our heart has expanded to envelop the entire world, but within that expansion there are pockets or cavities which we have left intentionally closed. Somehow, as our compassion expands, it works its way around certain people in order to avoid including them. perhaps within the widening circle, there are smaller circles that surround those in such a way as to isolate them and to keep them from receiving our compassion. These may be people who have hurt us in some way or another, deceived or betrayed us, abused us, misused us, taken advantage of us in some way, or turned their backs to us, abandoning us. Or it may be those who we have not known personally, but who nonetheless seem to cause us great agitation. It may be those who are unkind or even cruel. It may be those who have abused or exploited others. It may be those who commit acts of injustice and atrocities. It may be those who simply speak with ill will toward others, with hostility or hatred. It may be those who we consider inconsiderate or ignorant or self-absorbed. And this may include people in various walks of life, in various social positions, people who are influential, people in positions of power, people who abuse their power. And can we expand our compassion to include these people? This is where most of us draw the line. In fact, we may find the line already drawn. We may find that there's actually what appears to be an impenetrable wall. But I would challenge you to tear it down. In those spaces where we do not allow our compassion to go, we may feel something else entirely. We may feel a great deal of hatred. And this is all that hatred is, the absence of love. Just as darkness is the absence of light, or cold is the absence of warmth, hatred is the absence of love. And much like cold or darkness, hatred makes us blind and frigid. Wherever there is hatred in us, we suffer. When we hate, our intention is to inflict suffering upon the other, but it is we who suffer because of it. It may be that sometimes our hatred perhaps seems to agitate the other sometimes, but oftentimes they remain unaffected by it. And this is especially the case when it is someone who we have never had direct contact with, someone who we've never met and never will. There are many people we hate who will never know of our hatred for them. It will never affect them in the slightest, but in us, it eats away at our own happiness. It eats away at our own peace. It makes us bitter and miserable. And anything which disturbs our peace is not worth having. And I wonder if we can look into our own misery and see how it affects the way we behave in the world, how we interact with others, and so on. I wonder if we can notice how, whenever we are miserable, we tend to be self-absorbed, inconsiderate, selfish, even hurtful to those who are undeserving of it. And I wonder if we might notice how these kinds of behavior are the same kinds of behavior that we see in others and for which we withhold our compassion. So when we look at those who we see as selfish, as inconsiderate, or even cruel, we might realize that all of this is arising from suffering. That the only reason they behave that way is because internally they are suffering. And with this understanding, can we begin to expand our compassion to include that suffering? I'm not saying that we tolerate or condone the way they behave. I'm talking about looking more deeply beyond all of that to where it arises from, to recognize that suffering in them, and to offer our compassion to that suffering. Just to hold that in our heart and to surround it with compassion. And with compassion, we might wish them healing. We might wish them happiness. We might wish for their own compassion to awaken within them. There's a prayer in the Buddhist tradition that is in many ways an exercise for expanding the heart of compassion. And just as I explained early on, this all begins with oneself. And so we begin by asking, may I be safe and protected from all manner of affliction. May I be healthy and strong. May I be free from suffering. May I be happy and at peace. And then we extend this prayer to include all living beings. May all beings everywhere be safe and protected from all manner of affliction. May all beings everywhere be healthy and strong. May all beings everywhere be free from all suffering. May all beings everywhere be happy and at peace. If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.